When working in the round, you need needles that will allow you to literally work in the round, so around and around and around. In a way, it's actually almost easier to talk about the needles that you can't use for working in the round. Those are straight needles where you have that little knob on the end that stops your stitches falling off. Pretty much all the other needles can be used, and we'll look at all of those now. Double pointed needles are probably the most commonly associated with working in the round, although you can work back and forth on them. Here I have two different lengths, but they come in different lengths, different sizes, etc. A great size to buy them in is probably 15 or 16 centimeters. Sometimes with the bigger ones they're a bit too long, but it depends on what you're making, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. Following on from double pointed needles, you have circular needles. So these are needles where you have tips on both ends and then they have a long cable or a short cable in the middle. These needles come in all of your different sizes, so all the way from probably like a 0.75 mil all the way up to like super chunky big sizes. But here you'll see that I have a range of them. They come in different lengths, some of which are suitable to things like hats, others which you'll use for sweaters, some of which you will use for socks. Generally in a pattern, when you're given a measurement for these, by the way, it is tip to tip, although it does vary by designer. So this is a little one for small circumferences, medium circumferences, large circumferences, and so on and so on. However, you can also use these needles for working really small circumferences in the round, but we're going to talk about that in the magic loop video. Another little tip, just as we're talking about them, before you run out and think, oh my goodness, how am I going to have cables in every length and every size? There's a magical thing called interchangeable needles. So you can buy different cable lengths to use with the same size tips, so that you can have many, many different needles by only buying the cables. Don't run out and buy a set yet. You do need to know whether you like the wood tips or the metal tips and what tips are your favorites, but it is just there as a tip for you to know that it does exist as a set. So you don't have to buy like thousands of needles, which can seem very probable when you start working around, but it's definitely not the case. So which needles for which project? So the whole idea of working around is that you're knitting to a particular circumference. So if you're knitting something that's generally, if you're knitting something that has a very small circumference, like a sock, you have a choice of using a very short circular needle or double pointed needles. For very, very small circumferences in the round, you may find that only double pointeds will work because there aren't short circulars that are that short. This is about the shortest short circular needle you can buy, and you can see that there is really a minimum length. So often for very small projects in the round, like maybe Christmas socks, baubles, etc. for Christmas, you can always have your DPNs. Then once you get up into a certain size, you can use either DPNs or short circulars. Then for bigger projects like sweaters, you're going to be using a much longer needle. So for example, you might use an 80 centimeter long circular needle, or an 80, 100, etc. It's worth bearing in mind though that it is really dictated to you by the circumference of the project. However, as I've said previously, I'm going to show you a method as well that allows you to use your long circular needles for very small circumferences, so that it might save you a little bit on buying too many needles. So here you see a little project that is quite narrow, and I knit that on double pointeds. This is a sock where I've actually knitted on a special sock needle, which I'll show you in a minute, but you could knit that on double pointeds. For my mid-length needles, you might have things like hats, cowls, etc. Of course, for a hat, you might need to use double pointed needles at the end if you wanted to use a circular needle. Don't worry, pattern designers will generally tell you what needles you need to buy. For completeness, I'm just going to mention these two needle types, the Sock Wonder and Addi Trios. And these are special needles for doing small circumferences in the round, particularly socks. And they've definitely become a very favourite sock needle with many people. I'm not going to cover them in this course, but I wanted to share them with you because it is useful to know that they're there. But before worrying about needles, the first thing we're going to concentrate on is joining in the round, making sure our stitches aren't twisted, and how to actually get those stitches working in the round for you.